Thank you, Kate, and welcome to this very first panel discussion on student teaching, the make or break of teacher preparation. This is a PowerPoint-free panel. I am Mike Casserly. I'm the Executive Director of the Council of the Great City Schools, the nation's primary coalition of large urban school districts, and a group for which this topic is very important. We're running a little bit behind, so we're going to jump right into this topic. With us today to discuss NCTQ's new report on student teaching is a diverse and distinguished panel, including Nancy Brickhouse. Nancy is Deputy Provost for the University of Delaware. She is responsible for undergraduate academic affairs and works with the Provost on the administration of academic policies and faculty appointment and promotion. Prior to becoming Deputy Provost, Dr. Brickhouse served as Interim Dean for the College of Education and Human Development, where she was Deputy Dean since 2009. She is also Professor of Science Education at the university and has served as Director and Associate Director for the School of Education. We also have Dr. Edward Crow. Dr. Crow is Senior Advisor for the Teaching Fellows Program at the Woodrow Wilson National Fellowship Foundation. Crow also provides consulting services on teacher quality, K-16 policy issues, and evaluation for several other organizations and projects. He also served as an evaluator for the New York City Partnership for Teacher Excellence and wrote a commission paper for the Committee on Teacher Preparation for the National Research Council. He was also an advisor on the Carnegie Corporation of New York's implementation of the Teachers for a New Era initiative. We also have with us the author of the report that we are discussing, Julie Greenberg. Julie is Senior Policy Analyst for NCTQ. She specializes in teacher preparation. She directed the student teaching study, and her work at the organization has included studies of elementary teachers' mathematics preparation and the quality of teacher preparation in a number of states. Julie taught secondary math for 13 years in the Montgomery County, Maryland public schools. We also have Dr. Nellie Hecker, who was introduced earlier. She is a faculty member at Furman University since the fall of 1979, has served as the chair of the Department of Education and director of teacher education since 1999. She has a bachelor's and master's degree from Springfield University and a PhD from the University of Georgia, and her specialty is literacy education. Also with us is Dr. Carol Peck. Dr. Peck is the former president and CEO of the Rodell Charitable Foundation of Arizona. Under her leadership, the foundation developed and implemented successful teacher, principal, and math initiatives, as you heard earlier. She also was the former superintendent of the Alhambra, Arizona public schools. She has been recognized as National Superintendent of the Year, National Administrator of the Year, and Valley Leadership Woman of the Year, among many other honors. And then last but not least, Dr. Frida Russell is the first African-American Dean of the College of Education and Leadership at Cardinal Stritch University, Wisconsin. She is a graduate of the Great City School System of Milwaukee and formerly an elementary and reading teacher in the PK-12 schools in both Milwaukee and the suburbs. Her service to the community includes her work in helping to start 2 independent elementary schools in the city of Milwaukee and has conducted extensive research. We're going to start the discussion with a set of questions for each of the panelists, but you in the audience should know that the panelists have not seen the questions beforehand, but they're more than ready to answer them. If we have a little bit of time, we're also going to give the panelists an opportunity to ask each other questions, and then finally we are going to take questions from the audience and from social media. For those of you sitting at tables, I'll repeat what Kate had mentioned beforehand. That is, if you have questions for this panel, please put them on these white index cards. If you have questions for the second panel, please put them on an index card of another color. I hope that is clear. Also, this session is being taped, as we forewarned our panelists, so please behave appropriately. All right. Now let's get right to the question. Let me start with Nancy Brickhouse. Nancy, until recently, you oversaw the student teaching program at your institution as dean. Your program was one of the 134 included in NCTQ's review in this report. And in the course of the evaluation, you expressed concerns about the evaluation and process in general. Could you elaborate on 2 or 3 of your most significant concerns about this review?
Sure, thank you. My initial concern really was with the quality of the standards themselves. The case needs to be made that the 5 critical standards actually make a distinction between good programs and bad programs. And as of now, we don't have any evidence that that is actually the case. So that would be my first concern. The claim is made that they're observable and measurable. I would argue that that's not actually the case. There's a lot of questions I have about the way in which they were measured, and it's really not clear to me even today exactly how those standards were measured. The other thing that concerns me about the quality of the standards is that I don't think they address what really matters. They're actually not very reform-oriented at all. They're quite procedural. It's about do you have your documents in place and what processes do you use. What matters is what students are getting out of their experience. And from that, we have absolutely no data in this study about what our teachers are being prepared to do during student teaching. So we need better evidence, okay, evidence that actually tells us what our student teachers are taking away, how they're benefiting the children in the classrooms, and how they're benefiting the profession. So we need better evidence, we need better standards, we need a more rigorous analysis. The analysis needs to be much more than 5 standards. We need a rigorous, thorough analysis with multiple sources of data, not just the document analysis, but a thorough set of evidence, talking to teachers, talking to students, talking to children, doing classroom observations. That, I think, would be very beneficial. I should also say this is an extremely important topic. I absolutely support rigorous evaluation of teacher education programs. Those of us who are doing this work believe it's important that we constantly scrutinize our programs and constantly improve them. And we do it ourselves, but we welcome outsiders too. But it needs to be done in a way that's rigorous, because we actually hold ourselves to higher standards than this. And so we welcome NCTQ in doing their analysis, but we're going to ask them to step up their game and do a more rigorous analysis next time.
Okay. Just a quick follow-up for you, Nancy. Would it be your contention then that programs could meet these 5 or these 19 standards and still have a lousy program?
I don't know about the 19. I think they could, yes. Now, I don't want to take anything away, though, from those who did well. I am not casting aspersions on those that did well at all, okay? They may well have fabulous programs. I'm just saying we don't really know from this report about the quality of programs.
Okay. Ed? Particularly with your 8 years that you served as advisor to the Carnegie Corporation of New York on implementation of the Teachers for a New Era initiative, you've developed a broad perspective on teacher preparation institutions nationwide. What do you see as the implications of the findings of this study, particularly when considering proposals for the reform of teacher preparation, and especially for the myriad initiatives promoting more extensive clinical practice throughout the country? Implications of this study.
Implications. Well, one implication, I think, is that it's clear that whatever standards we think we have nationally, either through state policy or through accrediting agencies, are not very useful. They're at the best, they're low bars, 10 weeks of student teaching, which is, I think, a very generous standard to the profession, is not enough for people to develop the teaching skills they need to be effective. I think on the policy side, the fact is that most of the standards that are in place nationally that were examined and used as best NCTQ could have limited research evidence behind them. As Kate said, the number of studies that meet reasonable standards around which accreditation standards and state policy are often based are pretty weak. I mean, we might care what student teachers think about their experiences, but what we really want to know in an objective, measurable, quantifiable, replicable way is what they can do as student teachers and as new teachers. Only a handful of programs in the country, maybe 50 out of 1,400, if that, have an evidence base that would allow them to answer that question in a way that we would accept as real evidence.
So would it be your contention then that other institutions that have standards like NCATE and the like suffer from the same, some of the same issues about specificity and rigor of the standards that Nancy was pointing out?
Yes, I think you could say the same thing really about virtually every teacher education program in the country. Whatever the aspirations are, the evidence-based way in which the quality and competence of student teachers is measured is simply non-existent. Okay.
Do you see this as a step forward?
Yeah, yes, I think it's a step forward because it's shedding clear light on what it looks like from a source that's outside the profession.
Okay, great. Nellie, you've directed teacher education at your institution now for over a decade. What are the 2 or 3 most significant improvements in student teaching you've seen over that period, and what is your agenda and the agenda for your institution for improvement of student achievement going forward as you look out over the next 10 or 15 years?
Perhaps the greatest difference that took place at Furman in the last decade was the fact that we separated graduation from the actual student teaching part of the program. In other words, our students can graduate at the end of 4 years, but in order to complete the student teaching, we call it an internship, they must return in the 5th year, and they must work with a cooperating teacher in order to spend time in the school. So that is a great, that had a great impact in our program because most of our graduates and their families were used to the traditional model that you graduate and you complete your certification requirements. Of course, on our part, we had to go to the State Department and convince them that the program would be so unique. We had to ask permission to change the program, in other words. When the State Department gave us permission to change the program, we had to begin the process of collecting data to support our contention that the students were going to stay, for one thing, in the field. And our retention rates went from the same retention rates that we've had at the national level, which is that after 3 to 5 years, 50% of the teachers leave the field. Our retention rates are over 90%. So that was a major kind of a change for us. In looking at the future, I think that we want to continue to work on something that most institutions are concerned about, and that goes back to a statement that Ed made, and also Nancy, that we have to figure out what is really happening in terms of the effect of those students in the field. We put our students through projects, the unit work sample projects, but we are still working on reliability and validity of those measures.
Okay. Great. Carol, you've been a change agent both inside of school systems as a superintendent and externally through the Rodell Foundation. What are the 2 or 3 biggest obstacles you see in the improvement of student teaching programs, both from inside of the school district's perspective and now from the outside operating a student teacher preparation program?
I think the biggest obstacle is finding cooperating teachers who not only are extremely qualified and capable and successful, but who want student teachers. One of the mistakes we made in our first year, this is our 8th year of the program we've just completed, was we picked these outstanding teachers in high poverty schools who were in the top with student achievement, who were at a school that was rated compared to other high-need schools. They were rated quite high. And we picked these great teachers who, with a huge honor and with our savings bond. And what we found was we overlooked the fact that they didn't really want to mentor a cooperating teacher. As a matter of fact, they were great. You'd want your child in their classroom. But they wanted control of their classroom and didn't want to turn it over to a cooperating teacher. So we had to go back the following year and relook, because we had student teachers who said, I didn't have much of a chance to teach. The teacher didn't want to give me that responsibility. So we needed those that not only are good with children, but excellent with mentoring. The other obstacle, I would say, as a former superintendent, when I first arrived in the Alhambra district, after the first year, what I realized is cooperating teachers were picked by saying, who here would like to have a student teacher? And oftentimes, at that time, it was the one who perhaps smoked, who wanted the break with a student teacher. It might have been for a number of reasons, and some certainly quite capable, but some were not the role models that you would want. And so we changed that in the second year. I will tell you that 6 years later, if you don't keep watching what you change, we were back to who would like a student teacher. And so we had to change it again, and they've effectively, I think, since then kept that standard. But finding the cooperating teachers who are the best role models, who want to mentor a teacher, is very trying. But I will tell you that the results, and I can give copies to you, or Jackie Norton. I just retired 2 weeks ago. Jackie Norton, who replaced me, or Howard Paley, who heads up the program. We've had outside researchers evaluate the program, and the former student teachers have very high student achievement even in their first year, compared to all the other teachers at their same school who have been there for 1 to 30 years. And they also compare very high to the group of student teachers that graduated from the university in the same year in high poverty schools.
Okay, let me just follow up a little bit. You saw Kate's example of the Chicago public schools, where there was a demand for about 1,300 new teachers a year, but that the institutions, according to the model that NCTQ developed, was really only capable of handling maybe 400 or so student teachers. How does the Chicago Public Schools fill the 900 teacher void?
Boy, if I had that answer, I'd be consulting with the Chicago schools.
We can arrange that.
I think, obviously, that's quite a concern. I think there are some excellent cooperating teachers who, once you have a carrot, and not only a carrot of the savings bond that we implemented, but a carrot of the recognition and the publicity, that helps. We have partnerships with the 3 major newspapers in Arizona, our exemplary teachers end up with big pictures in the paper and a huge banquet with the governor and the commissioner of education and all the superintendents of schools, and quite a nice event at the Ritz. And they are given such positive publicity that they all would like that opportunity to be cooperating teachers. And so I think you not only have to put it out and say who would like it and take a look, but I think there are good people out there who could step up to the plate.
Okay. Frida? The need for teacher preparation programs and school districts to work collaboratively to develop strong student teaching placements is described in the report, and as the dean of your institution, you fostered that kind of relationship and collaboration. What do you see as the main barriers to collaboration, and what are the most important specific steps that teacher preparation programs could take to foster better collaboration with local school districts?
Thank you. First, I think I'd like to answer that end question that you gave Carol, and that feeling that
okay, we have a consulting arrangement in Chicago for you. If you do.
And I would like to say we're about an hour and a half away in Milwaukee, so we certainly have enough qualified candidates that we could send to Chicago.
Great. You're on.
I would answer that question by saying that there needs to definitely be a continuum of professional development that wraps around a school district, which would include, and I just had a meeting with some folks in the business community yesterday, and I said, Cardinal Stritch has a "it takes a village" model. And the "it takes a village" model looks like this. We need the medical community. We need higher ed. We need the business community. We need all of the different facets of community that builds social and human capital in a community to help with teacher preparation. And so and because Cardinal Stritch feels so strongly in that we need this wraparound of professional development, and we need input from all of the different community advocates to support teacher education, to support student learning at the K-12 level. Because we believe this so strongly, we require in the College of Education and Leadership that all of our faculty serve in the community. And so they are released for 3 credits of partnership, where they have to go into the community, into a school setting, work with a superintendent or a principal, new teachers, veteran teachers, provide professional development, Children's Hospital, the medical college, all of those areas where there's impact that we could have on student learning. And so we wrap around the community, providing professional development, providing mentoring and instructional coaching for our cooperating teachers, providing professional development in whatever the areas need for our current teachers. And we just kind of build community that really wraps around, and we really believe that it really takes a village from all facets in order to make this work.
Okay, terrific. Let me pose a question to Julie, because it came up in the course of the discussion here, and that is the issue about the standards being procedural and operational in their orientation, rather than maybe say content or outcome oriented. For instance, we didn't see a standard on student-teacher interpretation and use of instructional data, for instance, or something even akin to that. What was the thinking of NCTQ on the standards that you put together and this balance between kind of operational and procedural and content and outcome?
Well, this is an issue that is going to drift from this panel to, I think, the next panel discussion on the National Review. this is where teacher education is, at the cusp of moving from more of the sort of input standards to output. And the dichotomy that's been drawn between them, as if some people are supporting one and some people are supporting the other, is sort of false. We support them both. We see a role for a sort of combination. At this point, when we looked at student teaching, and we do have, there's sort of an infiltration of some of the sort of outcome measures. You'll see in one of the standards there's an examination of whether the evaluation instruments ask the student teacher to look at student performance as part of their sort of training in competency development. So we're not ignoring it, but what we felt is that this is a very complex undertaking. It involves multiple institutions, lots of different people filling different capacities. Takes place over time. You've got to maintain something. As Carol said, you know, you can put something in place and then it drifts. You've got to have policies and procedures in place in order to keep people identifying on the mission. What are we out to do? How are we doing it? How do we measure it? How do we get feedback? How do we improve it? And so the standards, as you look at them, are focus on a very key element of the whole experience. That's that cooperating teacher. That is key. They also go into some of the competencies of the student teacher. They go into the institutional mechanisms for getting a vantage point on the whole process and seeing how it can be improved. We think that the combination, all put together, really provides, you know, standard 1 through 18 for sure, provide the framework within which a program can have the best possible outcomes, that it can take student teachers and develop that novice teacher who's going to walk into the classroom and not set students back in their first year.
Okay. Let me return to Carol. I think she had a second thought on the Chicago question. Carol?
Thank you. Chicago would not have all of the openings that it does if the former student teachers had longer longevity in teaching. Nationwide, 50% of new teachers leave in the first 5 years. What we've shown in the Rodell Exemplary Teacher Program is that 80% of those teachers stay on and teach, and we've only had 8 years, so we don't know how many. But the truth is that when you're good at your profession, when you feel well prepared, when you've had an excellent role model and you're successful, you stay in the profession. If you don't have the skills, especially to teach in the high-need schools, and you're frustrated, you leave the profession. And so I would suggest that Chicago would have fewer openings if there were more highly qualified student teachers who went into the teaching profession there.
Okay, so you see a partial answer to that question as being a retention issue. You didn't tell me a whole lot about what the role of the teacher college was in ensuring higher retention, but I take your point. It's a good one. All right, I'm going to ask the panelists, we've got lots of really good questions that have come in both from Twitter and from the audience, and we're going to move to those quickly. But let me just ask members of the panel if they have a burning question that they would like to ask of each other. All right, Nancy?
I would like to ask Frida in particular. You've done a lot of work building relationships with school districts, which is a very important component of teacher education programs. Strong teacher education programs do a lot of professional development with the cooperating teachers where they place their students. I would like to hear you comment on the one teacher per building model. Is that a good model, this idea that if you really look at who should be a cooperating teacher, it should be about one teacher per building? Can you say something about that model?
Are you referring to something that Kate, when she kind of talked through it was interesting listening, Kate, to you talk through, I think it was page 19 of the report, and I was kind of following the visual. And I started making little marks at the margin, and I think this is going to answer your question, where you started with the 20 sufficiently experienced teachers. And then I started writing, but you can change that with professional development, instructional coaching and mentoring, and good leadership in the school. So that automatically changes that number coming down to 5. That repeats itself. It's exponential, and that would also answer the comment that Carol mentioned about Chicago Public Schools or the retention. In order to retain highly qualified teachers for a long period of time, there has to be this collaboration and this intentional growth, this intentional instructional mentoring and coaching that happens throughout the life of the profession of the teacher. It starts pre-service, it goes into in-service, and it doesn't end. There's a continual growth in knowledge, skill, and an understanding of that professional disposition that's needed as 21st century, 22nd century, as things keep changing, technology changes, demographics of families change. And so knowledge has to continue, and therefore there should be this wraparound intentional from all the different communities into a school to support that teacher's growth from pre-service all the way through the life of a teacher. So when I looked at this 20 sufficiently experienced teachers, I thought, wow, okay, we could really carry that down. Instead of it being 1, it could still be 20 if you wrap around that experienced teacher so that that growth continues with instructional coaching and mentoring that should continue all the way through the life of a teacher.
And if I could just
Yeah.
please
Nellie?
add to that. Furman's retention numbers, of course, are not just happening because we extend the program into the 5th year. Our contracts with the partner school districts are such that the partner districts actually release a master teacher that will take responsibility for guiding 3 to 5 of our student teachers, in addition to the school setting, giving a major responsibility for mentoring, and in addition to the supervisory role of a university professor. So unless we find a way to bring people together and work together to support the student teacher, and the mentoring part becomes so important, we cannot expect that that will be a successful experience for the student teacher.
Let me go ahead and jump to questions from the audience and from Twitter. And as we go along, if there is something that each of you need to ask of each other, let's just do that in the course of things. But we've got some terrific questions, and as you might guess, there is a number of questions, both from Twitter and from the audience, on non-traditional teacher preparation programs. How does they compare with the best and the worst of the education schools? That coming from Twitter. And from the audience, questions about the implications of this studies for alternative route certification programs, Teach for America, New Teacher Project, and the like. And then a related question on Teach for America and how they fit into this whole question about teacher preparation and whether or not they are an example aside from all of this, or they ought to be folded into these kinds of reviews. So I'm just going to throw that out. Maybe Nancy, first to you, and then we'll ask the others.
I'm not really sure how to respond to that because this study does not address alternative routes programs at all, and in many cases they don't have student teaching, so I don't know what you would evaluate. it's a completely different model. But I will say one of the problems with...
They do have a preparation program that one might define under this same rubric. Would you be in favor of including their preparation into a study such as this?
I mean, I think generally speaking, one of the challenges we have is that teacher education programs are not all held to the same standards. I mean, if we are going to, do need to treat all of our teacher education programs, if we're going to be perceived as fair, we have to hold them all to the same set of standards. In this case, they were not, they were not included. Ed probably knows a lot more about alternative
Well, I
routes
just
than
want
I
to
do.
make a comment about what we mean by alternative routes. First of all, most
That's
universities
very
that have,
fuzzy.
most universities with teacher education programs that we call traditional routes also have alternative routes.
Right.
So, for example, in Texas, 22% of new teachers who are prepared in the state come from alternative routes housed at universities. So, to the extent that we're creating or applying standards, often the question that was just asked is set up as a dichotomy. You guys are giving a pass to people like Teach for America. But in fact, there's a much wider array of alternative programs, and they all ought to be held at the same standards and evaluated the same way.
Okay, anybody else want to wade into this?
I would just say that one of the reasons that Teach for America has grown so rapidly in Arizona is because there's a dearth of qualified new teachers wanting to go into high poverty schools. And so if there were more high quality student teachers wanting to go into the most difficult schools, there wouldn't have been that tremendous opening for Teach for America. And some of those schools, there are schools in Phoenix that have had a second grade classroom, never had a full-time teacher. They had sub after sub after sub after sub, and that's pathetic. The kids who needed the education the most don't have access to a teacher. One day is horrible, 1 week is horrible. A year, most of these kids will not be able to recover from.
Let me ask a kind of a related question, since we brought up Teach for America and alternative routes and the like. There's a question about national board certified teachers and whether or not a study like this should have or could in the future look at national board certified teachers as part of its cooperating teacher pool. Any thoughts on this? Good idea, bad idea?
We have a number of national board certified teachers as Rodell exemplary teachers, but just being a national board certified teacher does not make them a good mentor, and they may not even want a student teacher. So I think it's a wonderful thing to look at, and those teachers have outstanding competencies, but that alone is not enough.
Okay, any other thoughts on that one? Okay, you heard Kate at the opening describe one of the recommendations in this report about the admission into teacher preparation programs being based, at least on part, on content mastery. What do you think would be the effect of that recommendation? Do you agree with it? And do you see any negative side effects that we ought to be thinking about of raising the admission standards to teacher colleges?
I think that's absolutely on target. I think that we should care a great deal about the academic preparation of our students. And it's one of the reasons why when we evaluate teacher education programs, we also need to look at them much more holistically than just looking at one little piece of it. Because what happens before they get to student teaching is critically important. And as teaching academic subject matter is what teachers do. And so the academic preparation is extremely important. We have spent at Delaware a decade doing very fine-grained analyses of the mathematics learning of our students in their mathematics courses. We're now following them into student teaching and into their first year of teaching to see how that impacts their teaching of mathematics. It's a very content-specific focus in terms of this research, but it's absolutely the kind of analysis that I think we need to be doing if we're going to actually make progress in improving what goes on in schools and improving our teacher education programs.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'd agree with the recommendation. I think it's the right thing to do, and I'd confine my remarks now to elementary education because that's the subject of the study. I mean, we have an opportunity, we have a massive oversupply of elementary teachers, and we have a massive overproduction of elementary teachers in many states. And so it's a wonderful opportunity to raise standards to the point where routinely and predictably elementary teachers who graduate from all kinds of teacher preparation programs produce student achievement in the young people they teach. And we should raise the entry standards and the performance standards in programs high enough to make that a regular feature of our life in education and not the sort of unusual circumstance.
Okay. We've also have a number of questions from the audience about the new Common Core state standards that over 40 states have now adopted, and numbers of states are continuing to review. How are the teacher preparation programs changing to accommodate the implementation of the Common Core, and how are teacher preparation institutions working with local school districts on that implementation? And let me start with Frida.
Thank you. I think I would start by saying what I'm doing right now, and actually what I started doing when Common Core was in draft form, was meeting with the chairs of the different content areas in the Arts and Science College. So that would be chair of science, math, social studies, all the different specific areas. And making sure that they understood the changes, the implications that it would have on their courses as our students go through their science and English and social studies core coursework, involving the arts and science chairs in the changes in the curriculum writing and how that would impact their current courses, how they would need to add some additional pieces to their curriculum for teacher ed candidates, but then also challenging them to move into the community. Again, we talk about service learning and wrapping around school districts. So challenging the arts and science chairs to partner with the College of Education in the school districts to provide professional development so that we can bridge that achievement gap and help that transition from high school into college for students in those Common Core areas. There are some struggles at the middle and high school level in math and in science and in English, specifically literacy struggles. And so the College of Education is asking the arts and science departments to go into the community with us, specifically into the school districts, and let's begin to have that conversation with the high school math and science and social studies and English teachers, and partner from higher ed faculty to high school faculty to help bridge that gap of knowledge so that as our K-12 students transition into higher ed, there aren't these deficits in these areas. So I think that's what's coming out of the conversation with Common Core. It's allowing the arts and science faculty to have more buy-in in teacher ed.
Okay. In addition to standards that NCTQ are developing for teacher preparation programs, at some point, might I ask Kate to consider the possibility of doing standards on penmanship of audience members. So Twitter's only marginally better. An issue comes up, and this is one where urban schools have a particular interest in it, but all schools ought to have an interest in it, and that is the issue about the diversity of our teacher force. I did not see anything in the report per se or in the standards about the diversity of the teacher preparation programs and admissions and the like, but I wondered if the panel could say a word or two about the responsibility of the teacher preparation programs to help address this huge gap that we have in the diversity of the nation's teaching force. Nellie, do you want to take a crack at that?
Sure. That is needless to say, we all have a responsibility to prepare teachers to work with all children, and I wish that Furman could attract more of a diverse student body. I think that Furman is committed to attracting a greater, much diversity in the student body, and we work awfully hard to do that. At the same time, because for those of you that have had a chance to take a look at a website, because we have fewer minorities than many schools, we also have fewer students in the teacher preparation program that are minority students. So we have a responsibility there that we need to channel in a different direction, and that is that not only that we have to find high-quality cooperating teachers, we have to find high-quality minority cooperating teachers, so our students have an opportunity to work not only with Furman faculty, but with individuals that commit to the preparation of teachers in the schools. And I don't know if that answers your question, but there's no question in our minds that we have to continue to work awfully hard to prepare our students to be effective teachers in all communities.
So anybody else on this issue? Well, we've got a series of questions that I'll just kind of paraphrase here because they run along the same lines, and that is your thoughts on the U.S.'s kind of continuing work. This study would be a reflection of that in some ways, of the need to rank schools and rate schools and do some kind of assessment of schools that some people see as contributing to a conversation that relegates teachers to a subservient or second-class or negative role. Teacher bashing, I guess, is the term of art that a lot of people use. Do studies like this make it easier or harder for you as teacher preparation institutions to recruit high-quality teachers, given the current climate? Carol?
I might answer that from a little different perspective, that as a school superintendent for 16 years in Phoenix. And I welcome the competition and the ranking. Obviously, it needs to be as fair as it can be. It will never be totally fair. I mean, almost by definition. And it will always make some people happy and some unhappy by definition. My only concern is that when you start ranking, you compare apples with apples. And when we did that with the 15 schools in our Canberra district, we created banding so that we had our 90% and higher free and reduced lunch that we compared with the other 90% and higher free and reduced lunch. And our 80 to 90 and our traditional school, which has been in the top 3 in the state for 15 years, but our traditional school, you have to compare it with apples. You can't take that school, which was only 50% free and reduced lunch, and compare it with one that's 99% free and reduced lunch. So I have no problem with that, but one does have to make sure that you're not having apples and oranges.
Okay, so your perspective is that the quality of the standards and the assessment procedures and the instruments will go a long way to addressing some of the concerns that you hear from the field?
Sure, knowing that it will never be perfect.
Okay. By the way, urban schools have faced many of the same kinds of things because we're
Sure.
rated and ranked and poked and prodded all the time. Nancy?
I was just going to add that the issue of recruitment of high-quality students into our programs, I think, is part of what your question was
Yes.
attempting to get at. And I would just like to point everyone to a study that was released last month by Bill Schmidt in Science that looked at the mathematics preparation of teacher education candidates and looked at how the kind of oversupply that we have been talking about in terms of teacher preparation, that the abundance of teachers is oftentimes coming from programs with the lowest admission standards into their programs. I think this is a very important analysis, and I really recommend it to this audience.
Ed?
Yeah, I'd just say briefly, clearly rating systems have to be fair and open and done well. With that said, you know, occasionally someone turns down a Nobel Prize, but it's very seldom that a university resigns a #1 rating or a number 10, either academically or in athletics. And so this is often, it doesn't seem to be, to me, a relevant issue if the rating is fair.
Fair.
Okay. We have a number of questions from Twitter involving the funding of colleges of education and how equitably they're funded and how self-sustaining they are. Let's start with just the overall funding level of these schools initially. And can you talk to us about, just briefly, how it is they're funded, at what level? Are they vastly inequitable in funding across the country, and to what extent does that bear on the findings of this report?
Well, the accusation, of course, is that colleges of education are cash cows. And I think that's sometimes true, but it's not always true. Strong teacher education programs and strong leadership programs as well are expensive. They are very expensive. And so, you know, colleges, a lot of it depends on how your budget works at your particular institution. And I won't get into the details of that because it varies vastly from institution to institution. But teacher education is not something that can be done on the cheap. And that is a challenge for those of us who are dealing with shrinking budgets. It makes things very, very challenging. But it's something that we have to address.
But it also allows for us, Cardinal Stritch is a private Catholic Christian university, and so little to no funding. But it allows us to be very fiscally responsible with what we have, and to be very creative at the same time. When we follow up on how well our graduates are doing 1 to 3 years into the profession, it always allows us to point back and tweak and revise what needs to adjust in our programs. For instance, the undergrad program, teacher ed program that's cited in the study, we did a complete restructuring of that program based on the feedback from our graduates and from the school districts that hired them. That allowed us to put a mentor, to butt a mentor up with every student teacher from the first field experience through student teaching. So we had to play around with credits and all of those things to make it happen because we didn't have additional funding. But if we value it and we see that it's important, you find ways to make it happen. And so from their first field experience through student teaching, each teacher candidate has a mentor. Some other things that we did with the undergrad program is we turned it into a dual license because we believe that all children can learn at high qualities. We wanted all of our undergraduates to really have that understanding of working with the special needs population. So when you graduate with an undergrad degree at Cardinal Stritch, you have a regular ed and a special ed license. And so again, we didn't get any additional funding, but had to be very creative in how we needed to restructure that program to meet the current needs.
Okay, let me pause for just a minute and ask, now that the members of the panel have heard each other a little bit, whether or not you have a question for each other. Carol, you're nodding. Do you have a question for one of your colleagues?
No.
No. All right. Let me go back to the Chicago question that I posed earlier, and if our group, like a coalition of urban public school systems across the country, took up this recommendation that NCTQ is putting forth about restricting the number of student teachers in our schools and boosting the standards for cooperating teachers and the like, and all of a sudden we turned to you as deans of the colleges of education and simply said, we're not going to take as many anymore. We're going to find them from someplace else. What's your response? What's your thought about how that would work? Ed?
Well, I'm not a dean, so I guess I can speak authoritatively and then run for the exit here. I think what I would ask is there something our program could and should be doing differently that would make you feel as though that was not the right decision that you were making? Could we work something out together that was a change agenda that met your needs? See, I think what's going on here is we're sitting in this building. Ronald Reagan was the godfather of supply-side economics, whatever that is. But we're moving to a demand-side education world. And the demand side is just the question that Mike raised. What about districts are saying, we need teachers who are ready to teach, who can be highly effective, who will stay with us, who understand and care about our kids. That's what should drive the programs, not the supply of who comes and who we graduate. So now I'm a former dean as a result of that answer, but that would be my answer. What can we work together in a partnership so we can understand what we may not be doing as well as we're doing to get you to change your mind?
Okay.
And I think I probably answered that for Cardinal Stritch. That's not an issue for us because of our partnership in the community. They ask for our graduates, they ask for our student teachers because they get more than highly qualified, well-trained teacher. They get a faculty in their building. They get professional development from our college in education and leadership. And so because of that collaborative partnership, it's a win-win for both areas, and so we don't have that issue.
Okay.
We don't need to have the same issue, but one of the things that Furman did is our admission standards are very high, and we follow the students, and we are not afraid to say you're not ready. And when you're not afraid to say you're not ready, you are, in essence, not necessarily limit, but you qualify the person that goes to the school.
I would suggest that although there is a surplus of people graduating from teacher colleges, the fact is there is not a surplus of those wanting to teach in high-needs urban or rural districts. And so perhaps one needs to make a special road where you say, if you da-da-da-da, and perhaps that's where your scholarships go and some other incentives go, because there are schools and districts that clearly cannot get enough qualified teachers.
You're not suggesting that we lower our standards simply because they're harder to recruit?
I would never suggest lowering the standards.
Okay.
But maybe raising what they get with scholarships, et cetera, so that you have people who may not even have wanted to go into teaching and now want to, or math teachers that would have been hired by Intel or whomever that now want to stay in teaching.
Okay. Nancy?
So we have a lot of students who come to the University of Delaware and they'll say, well, you know, all I really want to do is teach second grade in Long Island, right?
Right.
And And our response to that is, it's not going to happen. And at Delaware, you cannot get a straight elementary teacher education degree and a single certification. You are required to get a second certification in either special education or in one of the middle school's content areas or in urban education. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is that's where they will get their first jobs. Right. I mean, we want them to be successful. We want them to stay in the field. And so we made a conscious decision 10 years ago that we would not produce elementary teacher education majors that were just that. They can all do something else. And so we think that was the right decision.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Does your dual certification include ELL?
We have that only at the graduate level. It's not part of the elementary teacher education.
Okay. I'm going to ask, since we just are at the end of our time, and we're going to be going into the second panel here in a minute, to ask each of you if you have a kind of a closing final thought about teacher preparation, about the report, about where it is we go next in this field. And let me unfairly ask Frida to lead us off.
Thank you, Michael. I'm not sure if I'm going to directly answer this question because my mind still goes back to that alternative certain, so I'll find a way to weave the answer in, but also look at the fact that Cardinal Stritch also has a partnership with Teaching Fellows and Teach for America. And so I think to answer your question, I would say know what you value as an institution, know what's important based on best practices in research, set clear benchmarks that you're able to measure the effectiveness of your preparation program from pre-service into in-service following your graduates and pointing back to what needs to be adjusted. But then also keep those standards high no matter what partners want to connect with your university. So for instance, Milwaukee Teaching Fellows and Teach for America wanted to partner with us. So it was a long conversation we had, and eventually we agreed that they would partner with us, but they had to follow the same components of our other teacher ed programs. So you couldn't come in with your general curriculum or expectations for Teach for America or Teaching Fellows because we have these benchmarks that are important that you had to align with. And so that mentoring from day one for our fellows and our Teach for America, from day one, they get a mentor that partners with them in that classroom, just as our non-teaching fellow and Teach for America students get. And we also shared with them, with fellows and Teach for America, that we will benchmark your students along with our students, and we will follow them out into the field as in-service professional educators. That the professional development will happen in the schools where the fellows and the Teach for America graduates are. And so I would say that it is very important to benchmark what you're doing, continue to stay with best practice research, and follow your graduates out so that in return you can look back and see what needs to be adjusted in your program as the century continues to evolve and the demographics of the population continue to change.
Okay. If we can ask everybody to be brief so we can get our kind of last thoughts in here before we wrap up. Carol?
The future of our country depends on high-quality education programs today. I applaud this study, and I hope that it's the first of many that focus on this topic. Our children deserve no less. Our country deserves no less.
Terrific. Nellie?
I believe that all of us need to be responsible citizens, I suppose, of teacher preparation. And every time we have an opportunity to look back, so we can do something as we look forward, and we use what we learn from our past experiences to restructure, tweak the programs, work with the community, make sure that our graduates are better prepared to work with children. We've taken really a step forward for the schools.
Yeah, good. Ed?
Well, first, I do think this report does make an important contribution to our knowledge about what goes on inside programs across all the states. And it's great to be here with representatives of programs that are doing good things. It's a great learning experience. I do think as a profession, the next stage has to be to figure out whether those things happening inside programs make a difference. We need a stronger evidence base. We need a profession and a group of professional organizations to work hard toward the development of that evidence base. Student learning outcomes, classroom performance measured objectively, feedback from graduates about how well they were prepared, feedback from their employers about how well they're doing, and persistence in the kinds of schools and school districts where we're working. We do not have that yet, and we still have too many people working against that. And so I think there's a challenge before us.
Good. Nancy, get the last word.
I will just say that I think this is extremely important work that we're all engaged in, that we need strong evaluations of teacher education programs. We need much better data to help us know what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, how we can move forward in terms of improvement. So I applaud everyone who's working on this problem, and I encourage that we work together on it.
Terrific. Could we get a round of applause for this very terrific panel and for their expertise? I also want to thank NCTQ and Kate Walsh and Julie Greenberg and their team for putting together an excellent and thought-provoking report. I know that urban school districts across the country are going to be paying a great deal of attention to the recommendations that come out of this, and we want to work with you on how to implement them better. So thank you very much. Great job.